Okay, welcome to the, Hawaii Broadband session of the Hawaii Digital Government Summit. I'm going to introduce our panels, myself last, but I'll start with Jason Thune. Jason is the Director of Network Planning at Hawaiian Telecom. He oversees a team responsible for the strategic planning, capital budgeting, and implementation of the company's telecommunications, TV, high-speed internet, voice, and fiber optic networks. That's a lot of stuff. His 13-year tenure at Hawaiian Telecom included oversight of Hawaiian Telecom's data centers, desktop teams, operational support systems, as well as telecommunications equipment, installation, and maintenance teams. Jason earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Illinois and holds a master's degree in business administration from the University of Hawaii. He currently serves as the chair of Aloha United Way's Society of Young Leaders and is a cohort of the 2013 Hawaii Asia Pacific Association Young Leaders Program. This is Jason. Don Yabusaki. Don currently heads the Information Systems and Communications Office of the State of Hawaii for the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, also known as DCCA. Previously served as the department's cable television administrator. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Hawaii at Manoa College of Engineering, and his experience spans several decades in the broadcast television industry, working in both the private and nonprofit sector. Because of the need for high bandwidth systems within the broadcast television industry, Don's background and experience gives him a broad technical background. I am Keone Kali. I'm the Deputy CIO of Operations for the state of Hawaii. I work for Sunny. I'm in charge of all enterprise shared services, infrastructure, security, and privacy, as well as strategically driving the operations to leverage technology resources, systems, and solutions more effectively and efficiently. I've been with OMT for the last year. We have done a tremendous number of improvements to the state's infrastructure, and broadband is one of those critical assets that we have been working on for a number of years in the state, and we'd like to share our information and knowledge with you and hope that you have questions at the end. So we'll start with presentations, and then we will have a question and answer session, and I hope you guys ask some really rich questions. Don't be shy. Okay, so first we're going to start with Don.
Good afternoon. I'm glad that you folks showed an interest in whatnot. One of the things that the Broadband Initiative, when it first started, the question really was, okay, what really is the problem? What are the issues? Where do we stand? Pretty much the questions, really revolved around, can we find a starting point? DCCA was fortunate enough to secure a federal grant. And if you can go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. The grant actually was very good because it provided us with needed funding, and with the help of the legislature, we also had dedicated staffing. And this allowed us to pretty much take on a wide range of broadband projects, but the most important one that we did pretty much was call it a snapshot in time of the status of broadband in the state. Among the other activities that DCCA participated in, we provide the institutional network connections through the cable television franchises. A lot of people are unaware of these particular connections, but what they are, as a requirement of a cable franchise, when the department issues a cable franchise to a cable company, there is a requirement in there for them to provide connectivity for government buildings. And a good majority of these are done at no cost, and there's also no recurring charge. These connections form the backbone of the network that powers government on both the state and county levels. So again, that's a byproduct of the cable television franchises. The department also engages in advocacy on behalf of the state, county, and the stakeholders. We host the Broadband Assistance Advisory Council, which is made up of stakeholders and government officials. There are members of the legislature on that body also. And finally, the department also, because it deals a lot in industries that are both regulated on the state and federal side, we also do advocacy on behalf of the state. An example of this would be FCC has some special funds, and when they're coming up for comment on how these funds should be spent. We basically participate, we give input. We want to make sure that the state is not excluded by any of their regulations in accessing these funds. Going back, again, the major project that I wanted to talk about this afternoon was the status of broadband in Hawaii and our work in pretty much getting all the facts down and doing a report. The grant, this is just some details, we'll gloss over this, but in total it was a $4.3 million grant. And this is pretty much what we've been utilizing to do not just this project on the status, but also to promote certain broadband activities. What we did was we started first from the broad view. So what this map shows is these are the existing Trans-Pacific fiber connections that are coming into the state. Now again, this is more of a graphic. Those individual fibers, those are not the actual paths, but this is the best way to separate them out. So this shows basically the current status, the current connections that are currently active. They're coming in from the West Coast. Some of them come in from Asia, and then there are a few that head down to the South Pacific. This is just a quick summary of the current capacity of these current fibers. So on the Hawaii to the US, you can see originally when it was built, the total capacity was 5.8 terabits per second. And with some recent upgrades, they're now up to 26 terabits per second. The Hawaii to Asia, again, the important thing to see here is there was an upgrade and the capacity has been increased. Okay. The interesting thing on this slide, this goes out to the South Pacific. One of the things that you'll note, if you look at the little comment side, if we look at the bottom one, while the capacity of that fiber is at 320 gigabits per second, currently the lit capacity, which pretty much represents its current use, is only down at 20 gigabits per second. So as you can see, really what's going on is to most of the islands, the South Pacific islands, they're still not utilizing anywhere close to the capacity. Now we take a closer look at the connections between the islands. This map represents the existing inter-island fiber connectivity. And by the way, that hasn't changed in a while. Now we're getting into the things that I think you're going to find a little more interesting. We did a mapping project for each island, and what we wanted to do was to map the unserved areas on each island. So as you can tell, the island of Hawaii, which probably has the most challenges, they've got basically a large landmass and the population is pretty much spread out. So you'll see a lot of red areas in there. Now, no, that's okay. The red areas, I should point out, those are the populated areas that don't have service. On all the islands, there are unpopulated areas. From this map, you can see Kauai was pretty well covered. Maui County has challenges. And then, surprisingly, there are some areas on Oahu that still don't have coverage, but Oahu's actually done pretty well in terms of coverage by the broadband providers. One of the other things that we were concerned with was besides unserved areas, we were concerned about underserved areas. And there were actually a few surprises here. The FCC has a benchmark of 4 megabits down and 1 megabit per second up. And that's kind of their benchmark as to this is their definition of broadband speed. So using that, there were a couple surprises. For instance, in this case, the bluish purple represents download speeds that are under that 4 megabit per second. and the red represents upload speeds that are below the 1 megabit per second. Interestingly enough, Kahului is one of the areas where, while they have broadband connectivity, it's currently underperforming. That was a bit of a surprise. There are also a couple surprises that were on Oahu. On the Big Island, as you can see, they've got, again, a lot of challenges, not just in the coverage, but again, in their broadband performance. So one of the things that we're doing with this information, now that we know the areas that we have to focus in, we're taking a look at trying to get the effort started to try and improve this. So we are working currently with the counties, the providers, and we're trying to increase, number one, the broadband infrastructure statewide, identify the underserved and unserved areas. But the other area that was another surprise was there are other things affecting not just access, but this goes into the infrastructure itself. So we are working right now with the legislature. We're also working with the county governments, and we're trying to lower the barriers in building out this infrastructure. On the other side, this was another little bit of a surprise. Hawaii is not quite up there in terms of adopting broadband. What we found is, while there are people that live in areas that have broadband service and whatnot, for whatever reasons, they are not adopting broadband. We're trying to get more into that, trying to get more research. Once we can kind of pinpoint what the range of reasons is, we can probably try and see if maybe an education effort has to be made. In some areas, we recognize there's some socioeconomic factors at work, but we're also documenting those. One of the real interesting things that we wanted to point out is, this is fairly recent information. This is just an example of the current costs. This is information taken off the website of the two major providers, Hawaiian Telecom and Oceanic. The interesting thing to note is the speed has gone up while the pricing has more or less stayed flat. But of particular interest here is the wide range of speed that can be purchased from the providers. You'll see this and whatnot. In some of the preliminary work that we've done, it's been expressed to us that the subscribers in Hawaii are actually very price sensitive. And because of this, there's actually a reluctance to purchase the higher performing speeds. So we're trying to look into that to try and get a little more information as to why this is, if it's strictly, a budget issue, or if, in fact, that the lowest speed that's being offered now basically provides them with adequate bandwidth for whatever applications they're using. So we're not quite sure if this is just purely application driven or if there are other factors at play, but it's something that we definitely, are looking more closely into.
Okay.
So, pretty much summarizing things, the broadband issue itself, because it's multifaceted and whatnot, it's a very complex issue. There aren't going to be any easy answers. And the solutions are also going to depend not just on one or two agencies or organizations. It really has to be a full effort to get across the board. The other thing that I mentioned earlier, we really need to identify more of the deployment and adoption issues and try and focus on them. I've got my contact information there in case anybody has questions and whatnot. And I think at this point, was it Keone?
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Don. On the heels of that, data gathering and analysis and mapping that DCCA did, there were, a number of actual things that came out of those studies. I mean, socioeconomic issues related to adoption, cultural issues related to adoption, just, gaps in physical infrastructure. But there's a lot of data that you can put together to show that, in areas that are what could be considered medically underserved areas or high incidence of, health issues and things like that are also the areas that are less served or underserved or not served at all by broadband and things like that. The household income plays a factor in, disposable income for people wanting to buy broadband services. There are cultural issues in this melting pot that, we live in Hawaii that some people don't value or prioritize broadband in the home that they need it. Don is working with the library, the Hawaii Public Library system, DCCA is, to roll out laptop programs in the libraries. Laptop sort of checkout. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. The state library is going to have a program that involves a laptop loan program. And these laptops are equipped with 3G connectivity, wireless connectivity. So the people who are checking them out don't necessarily have to have a broadband connection at home. And these laptops, right now, the plan is to be able to loan them up for periods up to 3 weeks at a time. In rolling this out, one of the issues that we're helping the library deal with is basically getting their staff trained so that they can help the public when it comes time to actually roll this project out.
Great, thanks. Okay, so broadband is really considered by everybody in the state, the legislature, all of these committees to be critical infrastructure for an innovation economy. It's a new day in Hawaii. We need fiber everywhere, and we need broadband capability to deliver public services. So we're creating diverse, resilient, trans-Pacific and inter-island fiber optic pathways. We're supporting continuity of government services, with that. One thing I'll mention as well is that, I don't think he's here, but Director Richard Lim of the Department of Economic Development, Business and Tourism, is in charge of the landing fiber here from the Asia. So his role is to land cables here, get the Trans-Pacific fiber negotiated and put here. General Darrell Wong, who's the Adjutant General for the state of Hawaii in charge of the state DoD, has the budget for the Hawaii Broadband Initiative and landing Trans-Pacific cables in landing stations and landing sites all over the islands. So it really is a mix of OIMT, DBET, DCCA, the governor's office, working this thing together with the other state departments. UH is doing their part. I mean, everyone's collaborating to make things happen. Okay, so there was this Hawaii Broadband Task Force in 2007 that had some, they first conceived of the fact that we need to get cables landed here and we need to have broadband and we need to streamline our permitting, okay? That was followed subsequently by the Hawaii Broadband Initiative that Governor Neil Abercrombie launched in 2011, which was for 1 gigabit ubiquitous service to all households in Hawaii at affordable prices. That's very challenging. So what is HBI? It is composed of a variety of things: trans-Pacific submarine fiber optic cables for backhaul, inter-island submarine fiber optic cables, or our middle mile, terrestrial fixed infrastructure, plain old telephone service, copper, coax, fiber, wireless and mobile infrastructure, microwave, WiMAX, 3G, 4G, LTE, and programs for economic development, healthcare, education, public safety, government efficiency, and civic engagement. Those are the drivers that allow people to adopt broadband and build it and make it more available. So at the end of the day, HBI is really an ecosystem of policy, investment, partnerships, programs, and technology. And we actively work with industry, from government, with private industry, to ensure that these connections are happening and these things are going on. HBI is a monumental challenge, and we have currently the most aggressive speed agenda in the country, okay? But it is shadowed in comparison to other countries like South Korea, Singapore, and people that are doing like massive bandwidth, and they're seeing their economy improve quite dramatically. One of the other drivers for broadband is data centers. And now, you know, we have a 5 data center strategy, 1 on each island, 2 on Oahu. Data is a big driver for network bandwidth and you know, things like that. Our switch Ethernet circuits have increased. We're at 12 gigabits, you know, in terms of all the circuits we have to the different islands for all the state offices. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. We have internet services, you know, currently at 500 megabit links and a gig total bandwidth going out to the different islands and for everybody that interacts through the state's network. We are clipping our current bandwidth when it was at 300 megabits per second, and now we had to upgrade it to 500 megabits per second. So let's go back to this slide. So you see the date on the bottom, 2013. So although the fiber, I'll make this caveat, because Don asked me. Good recommendation, Don. Although fiber optic cable in the middle of the ocean has, you know, a serviceable life, it's really the electronics that light it that make that times out over, you know, over time. So they can continue to, the providers can continue to split wavelengths and put more data bandwidth through those fibers as long as the fiber doesn't degrade. So this is a picture of our fiber going across the Pacific in both directions in 2013. The serviceable life of this fiber from when it was installed, if you take it for 25 years out, this is what our cable connections look like in 2025, if no upgrades are done to the electronics. This is what our cable connections look like in 2035. You'll be hearing crickets. Hopefully the coconut wireless will be still working well. Okay. Inter-island, 2013. Okay, these are the pathways we have. 2025, crickets. A little more dire situation. So in 12 years, unless we have improvements in the inter-island fiber capabilities and in lighting it, you know, to greater capabilities, you're going to be hearing crickets. Okay. One thing not to be undersold or not discussed is our microwave fiber, our backbone network. We have a data microwave backup that shoots between the islands, you know, from the top of Haleakala to, you know, Mauna Kea and down into, you know, from Maui, Lanai, Molokai. This is our backup network. Now, it's traditionally been supporting radio and land mobile radio and voice and things like that. But we have to now leverage this architecture, this infrastructure, bring fiber to these facilities, all these facilities, just like the wireless companies do for LTE and 4G and stuff, where they bring fiber to their towers. And we need to put up data microwaves and increase our bandwidth in case the fiber optic cables between islands something happens to them, or, you know, the H1 viaduct, you know, catches on fire, or is cut, you know, for some other reason, or a lot of things can happen out there, and they do happen repeatedly. So we want to have as much reliability in our infrastructure as possible. The example of this is a tower in Mount Ka'ala. The Coast Guard operates for us for our emergency microwave network for communications. But it's just more of the same. More co-location of facilities, more working with the providers to get microwave towers up, fiber to those towers, so we can backhaul the stuff. So what's it going to take? It's really going to take state, private, and state, federal partnerships. It's going to take the state and its partners applying for grants with FirstNet, telehealth, public safety broadband, rural development, education, public services. The BTOP grant that came through to UH, that UH manages with the Department of Education, was a $100 million grant. That built out the connection of all the schools. There's been like, I mean, there's several hundred schools, and now they're all connected, okay? Anywhere we can get fiber into a library, that's a public area that we can put up a Wi-Fi hotspot. We can do a lot of different things at libraries. Or anything that we consider an anchor institution. State contracting for private managed services with telecoms. As industry invests in their own infrastructure, we all come up. Their success floats all boats. We cannot do it ourselves. The state does not have $2 billion to spend on putting infrastructure in. And that's what it's going to take if we're going to have to get to gigabit. So with Hawaiian Tel and Oceanic and TW Telecom and all the other providers that are out there that I haven't mentioned, they are all investing in their infrastructure, and they're bringing their services up to higher levels. That serves us, it serves them, and, you know, we purchase those services. So regulating those service level agreements through franchises that Don was talking about, attracting consortia for landing new trans-Pacific submarine fiber cables. So when someone brings a cable from Asia or Guam or Japan or something like that, okay, the cable's yay big, right? 4 to 6 strands of fiber, 3 pairs, 4 to 6 single strands of fiber in that cable, right? The typical cost for bringing a cable like from Guam to California is $350 million, something like that. It's come down a lot. Okay, and there's consortiums that are actively pursuing that. They're all asking themselves, it's cheaper for me to go straight from Asia to California. Why do I need to stop in Hawaii? You just cost us money if you stop in Hawaii. And we say, no, we're the tip of the spear. We should be the entry point for the United States coming from Asia traffic. We can securitize it. We can do a bunch of stuff. It's important to have a presence here. We have a lot of data driving out of here. The government's here. It's the US. You need to come here. So various consortia have been making these arguments for the last couple months to get cables landed here. If we do not land a cable here, we are going to be in serious trouble. So we are 100% full court press trying to land cables here on any beach in any area that we can land them to get the consortia to bring the stuff here at their cost. Let's see. We've offered oversight of strategic infrastructure implementation. We work with industry partners to say, where are you developing out? Where are you building out your next thing? Where are you putting your next tower? How can we help you in streamlining permitting to get those towers built? So the permitting process is down to 6 months instead of 6 years or what it was in the past. And then hardening our infrastructure for physical and cybersecurity. We recently finished building the state's first Network and Security Operations Center. And from there, we were able to manage and mitigate any kind of incidents and cyber incidents and hazards and track hacking and things like that on our networks. And the same is true for these managed networks, going with traffic going to the mainland. All traffic in Hawaii, outbound traffic in Hawaii on the internet, traverses the exact same fiber pathways to the mainland or to Asia. All traffic, government, military, private sector, commercial, schools, education, everybody's on the same fiber. So that could be a problem. Don was speaking about the total lit capacity. There's a design capacity of the cable and there's a lit capacity. So as the lit capacity goes up, our bandwidth utilization is also growing. It's actually growing exponentially at this point in time. And we had thought about it. We had tried to look at it. We didn't have a lot of metrics. We've done speed tests. We've done the providers have done their own analysis of it. And at this point in time, our bandwidth increase in Hawaii is increasing at 5% a month. 5% a month, okay? What that means is that our total bandwidth utilization out of the state of Hawaii doubles every 15 months and more than triples in 24 months. So you're going to chew up that bandwidth really quickly. Okay? And if you start to add more to it, security, monitoring, it just takes up more bandwidth. And the more bandwidth you take up, to provide these services and the security we're running out. It's a finite amount. So I'm going to ask these questions later, but I'm going to turn it over to Jason to talk about some other pieces.
Okay, so for those of you who've seen your pamphlet that Kevin Paul is supposed to be here today, I'm sorry to disappoint that he's unable to make it, but they did need to send somebody who's much better looking. That's why I'm here. So all of you have seen Don and Keone's presentation so far, and I'm going to give the service provider perspective. And what you'll notice is there are a lot of similarities involved, and that's actually a good thing. Coordinating public sector with private sector to address some of these challenges is part of what HBI is all about. So I'm going to go through the 4 objectives that Keone talked about that the governor laid out as part of HBI and share with you some of what the impacts were for 2013, as well as what the impact was for the service providers in general. So for the first objective, the state did a great thing, not only for the service providers, but for the general public in passing Act 264. And what that allows our service providers to do is to actually deploy broadband by going through the permitting process within 60 days. That's pretty fast. In fact, that's really fast. It's definitely commendable. This law takes effect on the 1st of January. But even before that, we've seen the city and county of Honolulu especially be really fast on their turnarounds for permitting, especially when we use it for broadband. So how does this impact the public? Not only do you get your increased broadband service faster, but it also reduces cost, in which case we can keep prices stable. The faster we can get our workforce out there and not have them idle, the faster we can get service out there. The second objective really had to do with what Keone mentioned just a few minutes ago in the Trans-Pacific fiber. The government alone and the private sector alone can't do it. We have to work together. And I think Keone made it pretty clear that that's what needs to be done in order to land more Trans-Pacific cables in the state. And of course, he did mention that consumption will outgrow the capacity that's available. And so let me give you something from a service provider perspective, not only from a cost, but also from what is being driven by their end users that's kind of negating the need to stop by Hawaii. So as an example, between Asia and North America, there are a bunch of what they call express routes, where you have cables that don't stop in Hawaii. Not only is it cheaper not to stop in Hawaii, but the reduced latency time by not stopping in Hawaii is actually increasing the need for us to come up with alternative ways of convincing the conglomerates to stop in Hawaii. And that's part of the reason why both government and private sector need to work together. On the third objective, this is really around providing broadband in as many areas as possible. And so Don showed a little chart that did come from the various service providers' websites. Yes, prices are remaining stable and bandwidth continues to increase. So as an example, the bandwidth products that are offered to residential consumers today is basically doubled what it was at the beginning of this year. And if you go on to speedtest.net or you look at Ookla and you look back at the past 12 months, it's not the perfect gauge of broadband usage in Hawaii, but you'll notice that there's at least a 25% increase from this point a year ago. So to hit the 2018 goal, there's still a long ways to go, but if you look back in the past year, a lot of things have happened in order for us to get to that point. The biggest challenge that we will run into, and you can go to the next slide as well, is really addressing the underserved and the unserved areas. In a metro type of establishment, because you have the density and you have the demand, laying out a fiber infrastructure is much cheaper than, let's say, on the Big Island. So there are things that both the government and private sector need to do in order to service those areas. And in one case, the federal government provides grants that allow us to subsidize the cost of providing services to those rural areas. In 2014, there will also be some additional grants that the federal government's going to offer that allows us to expand what we call really unserved and underserved areas where it's pretty much cost prohibitive for both a wireless carrier as well as landline-based providers to serve. You can go to the next slide. So here's the key takeaways from a service provider perspective. I've shown the progress that's been made each year, or actually within 2013, both on the government side and on the private sector side. But we do have quite a bit of challenges, and that's mostly getting conglomerates around landing their cables in Hawaii, as well as being able to reach our underserved and unserved areas, which provide actually the most potential for getting the rest of the state lit, so to speak.
Great. Okay. Is there one after this? No. Okay. Sorry. Oops. All right, so my computer's frozen. Hold on. I don't have a broadband connection. No. There we go. Oh. Okay. All right, so let's talk. I have some questions for the panel, then I would like you guys to ask your questions, and I'd like those to be tough questions, strong questions. This is very serious business, broadband in Hawaii. What are the key drivers for broadband? Because it's not driven by nothing. There's something there that has to make it work. Everybody's getting on this bandwidth. What are the key drivers that you see for broadband, developing more broadband in Hawaii?
Well, one of the things that the neighbor islands, face really are challenges with medical care. And there were some previous programs running. In particular, there was one on the Big Island where they were trying to utilize broadband to basically help to bring care into the rural areas. So they were pioneering things like doing remote diagnosis. They, as part of that, also pushed for the electronic medical records. So in this case, one of the drivers was an application, and in this case, a very important application, which would help to serve the rural areas that don't have the level of physicians available that you would in an urban area.
Okay.
For service providers, I know it sounds like such a cliche answer, but actually the market helps to drive the demand for broadband. On the consumer side, you have a lot more over-the-top video coming across the line, such as your Netflix, your Hulu. As those types of services continue to expand, bandwidth will ultimately increase. And so we need to be able to provide that service to our customers. And that's not only for Hawaiian Telecom, that's for Oceanic, that's also for the wireless service providers. On the business and government sides, it's mostly backup infrastructure, being able to do voice over IP, the security that Keone mentioned is another one, and actually backhauling video is quite becoming a new factor that's increasing the bandwidth that we need to provide to the outer islands. For those of you who love using your 4G LTE cell phones, that's great for the wireless carriers. It's great for the wireline carriers as well, because ultimately all of that bandwidth demand needs to be backhauled to the mainland. So we need to provide that fiber infrastructure out there. So you have quite a few things that's driving demand out there, and we need to be able to keep pace and actually stay ahead of that demand.
Okay. Yeah, like you said, for government, I think the driver is data centers, data backup, infrastructure, computing, security, authentication, things like that. But Jason, let me ask you, the Hulu and the Netflix is no joke, right? So speak a little bit about content delivery networks and how much utilization we're getting on them.
Okay, so we've done some network assessments on what our consumers do as far as bandwidth is concerned. And it shouldn't really be any surprise. The biggest use of our internet traffic is Google, Amazon, Netflix. That's your top three, and it's not unique to Hawaii. It's pretty much the same all across the board. So content delivery networks, or CDNs, have a technology called caching, which actually benefits everybody. It benefits the service provider because typically we don't need to pay money to have that. It helps the customer because you're actually bringing that data, whether it's video or just content itself, closer to the network. And it reduces dependency on backhauling traffic to the mainland. So as an example, a lot of people like to watch Psy and his music video back in 2012. It hit 1 million YouTube views. It makes a lot more sense to bring that content closer to your network than to have it backhaul to the mainland. So those are one of the tricks, so to speak, that both content providers and service providers use to kind of mitigate the consistently growing need for bandwidth.
But it sounds like you keep, squishing it back into, the box, because as things grow and we get more capacity, we keep trying to compress it and compress it and compress it to make it so we're not bottlenecked, right? Yep. Because if I understand things right now, every text, every phone call on an LTE or anything else is going through the network. And my text is going to Atlanta, Georgia, before it comes back here to you.
That's correct. Yep.
All right. So that is, and I first noticed that when I was on Maui, and a car hit one of the aerial, one of the fiber running across the poles, and took it out, and all texts were down. One of the cellular networks was down because everybody's going over that fiber. Okay. Don, did you have something to add to that? Drivers?
think the bottom line on the drivers really is it's all application driven.
Okay. Okay, another one. Bandwidth is increasing exponentially. Fact. What are the impacts to our finite fiber optic capacity of continually increasing, exponentially increasing bandwidth?
You know, you and I have actually talked about it in our presentations and whatnot, but it is actually a very scary reality, because looking at the current level of fiber connectivity coming into Hawaii, even though we have right now a very good prospect of having another Trans-Pacific fiber coming to Hawaii, just the timing of that, I don't know how long, and in fact, you folks might know better than me how long it would take to actually have that come true. But even if they come in and whatnot, the fact that the bandwidth utilization is increasing exponentially, there is this fear that, a few years down the line, we're going to be in a very tight situation when it comes to the capacity coming in and out of the state. So, part of it is, well, the very first step is you have to raise awareness on that, and of course the seriousness of it. At least from what, we're seeing right now, there is attention on it. There are attempts being made to get more fiber pulled into the state. But, that's just one provider that we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
So it definitely is a concern, and it should be something that, really needs to be up there in terms of priorities in addressing.
Jason, what are the impacts, the exponentially increasing bandwidth on finite fiber resources?
Yeah, so that, like you pointed out earlier, Keone, the challenge really is on the Trans-Pacific. There are ways to handle the inter-island piece and even terrestrial. Those are typically the easiest ones to resolve. So Don asked, how long does it take to land a Trans-Pacific cable? It's not like, unfortunately, it's not like getting a permit from the city and county where you can just get it done in 60 days. Typically, running a cable takes multiple years, to Hawaii at least, and that's not because of any type of regulatory challenge. That mostly has to do with the distance. It's almost 2,400 miles to the mainland. It's 3,000 miles to Asia and almost 3,500 or more miles to Australia. And these ships aren't exactly the fastest. You're placing a cable thousands of feet below the surface of the ocean. And then once you're there, it takes time to run it up to the beach, put it in a building, and then put the electronics on both ends, and then get connectivity to the service providers. So this is not something where you can say it can be done within a year. It typically takes a lot longer than that, and I think that's part of the reason why we're having HBI as well as this session today, is to raise that awareness that A, there are challenges, and B, that we do need to work cross-functionally to address that before it becomes a real issue.
Yeah, and I can attest to the fact that on the bandwidth side, even though we have a 10 gigabit backbone on our network, our internet service provider, like you said, we turned it on at 300 megabits per second, and the thing just clipped for 8 hours straight. So we upgraded to 500 megabits per second. That's just internet traffic. You got a question? Yes.
So actually a comment, you talk about bandwidth increasing exponentially. You also have to make sure we take into account BYOD and the implementation of IPv6, where we're not only looking at cell phones and tablets, but anything that you plug into the wall or has a charge is going to be IP compatible in the next 3-4 years.
Right, and families and everyone, at least in our office, has a cell phone. They might have an iPad. They might have at home some kind of game console, and all their kids have iPads and iPhones and everything like that. All those devices connect to the network and talk all the time. So, yeah, stoves, things, right? Toasters. I will bring up this one example. So I was driving. It wasn't a toaster example though, Stan. Thank you. Yeah, I was driving. I was making a right on Dillingham or something, and there was this baby in a baby carriage. A baby, and the baby had a laptop, and the baby was like writing some kind of master's thesis or something. He was looking at the laptop and looking up at the screen and then typing again and looking at the screen. That's like sharks with laser beams, babies with laptops on the street. Unbelievable. So, true story. Okay. Key lessons learned. Let's talk about some best practices and key lessons learned. And we've our fiber is all where it is now. We've got issues with, securitizing a lot of stuff. I mean, we've got aging infrastructure. What are some of the lessons learned about how we do this? How do we approach this, from a infrastructure standpoint, from a monetary standpoint? How does one get it done in that aspect? I mean, what are some best practices and lessons we've learned so far?
I think the main thing is there's not going to be a single magic solution that's going to solve every situation. One of the things that we noticed when we did our studies on the infrastructure throughout all the islands, you have to remember that the permitting is done on a county basis. So the laws and the regulations vary from county to county. So there's, there is some consistency, but there's enough of a variance where each area has to be treated differently. So that's something that came up as an area that you just have to recognize it, that the process of laying in infrastructure, there is a different process and it varies from county to county. The other thing is because of pretty much the residents of Hawaii have this really clear idea of how they want to try and preserve things like the ocean, the views, and everything else. And that's reflected in pretty much the laws and the zoning regulations and whatnot. So, that adds another layer that, has to be complied with. It's very, very difficult for the providers to really put in infrastructure. And keep in mind that I'm not just talking about the wireline providers. You've got the wireless companies, I can imagine the problems that they run into when they try and put up a tower, for example. That's very difficult. People want the connectivity and whatnot, but not very many people want a tower in their neighborhood. And, I can understand that, but again, it's a concern that always has to be addressed. So, the bottom line is, to put in infrastructure, it's not an easy thing. There's a whole lot of rules and regulations that you have to comply with. Some of the more interesting things is we know that certain areas here on this island, the conduits are full. So even if you could get the permitting and whatnot, there's no room in the conduits to pull any more fiber. So the problems are very, very complex. It's not something that can be tackled with a single law, a single regulation or whatever, but it's something that you have to take a step back and really look at it carefully.
Thanks. From a service provider standpoint, the key takeaway on this is collaboration with private and public entities. We, the state of Hawaii, really aren't that big enough where one entity can do it alone. We talk globalization, and you're not only competing against domestic, but you're also competing against international. And with broadband, it's really no different. So you have Asia wanting content or data from North America and vice versa. So how do you get Hawaii into the mix? When Don showed and Keone showed some of the slides as far as where our bandwidth capacity is going, we have quite a bit of capacity going to the other Pacific islands. In fact, they look to Hawaii as the leader in that area. In fact, when we build out our infrastructure, they're kind of asking, well, how are things done in Hawaii? How is Hawaii laying out their infrastructure? And coincidentally, Hawaii asked the same thing of how are things done on the mainland. And so we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of data out there and best practices out there that we can leverage. It's all about putting all that together so that we can be just as competitive as the rest of the continental United States or in Australia or Asia.
Great, thank you. So a couple lessons learned. Don't put your data center in a basement in a tsunami zone. That's a good lesson. That's a lesson I think we've learned by now. Put your Trans-Pacific cable in conduit that goes out to the shelf at 20 meters. Don't just bring it up the beach. Things like that. There's a lot of the ways that things were done in the past, but now we have all these EIRs, EISs. We have, there are federal permits in addition to the state, the county permits or special use permits for conservation land, where people are putting up LTE towers and things like that. So getting all of that aligned is complex, like Don had mentioned. And I really think that we are in a competitive market, and it really does, there is a lot of competition out there. Your Australia's, your South Korea's, Japan, Indonesia is another one coming up. They're building massive data centers, networks with incredible capacity in Asia, and they're drawing business to them. They're getting anchor tenants, they're getting the Microsofts, they're getting Googles, they're getting Amazons, they're getting nodes and stuff out there. And we have to get on that landscape and get on the same page with them and attract their business, get them here. That's one of the drivers. And part of the economic development, Richard Lim and his department in DBED, they're working on that. Public-private partnerships, both in energy consortiums and cable consortiums, things like that. So I think it's, we have to remain competitive. We have to realize that we're not alone out here. There's a lot going on, and there's reasons why people bypassed Hawaii in the last decade. There are reasons why they will come here, and we just have to capitalize on that, and put a good foot forward. So we have some time now. I'd like to turn it over to the audience and let's have a dialogue or ask any questions that you might have, specific or general, of this panel, and hopefully we can try to answer some things. So does anyone out there have any questions they'd like addressed? Oh, okay, Pat.
This one's for Jason. Question with regards to some of the broadband federal dollars that are out there. I noticed the last round, Hawaii Telecom got 1.4 million out of a very large amount. There's going to be another $1.8 billion that are going to be released here very shortly for broadband deployment in challenged areas, which we are. What is being done to get a larger share of that 1.8 billion than 1.4 million, let's say?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So this is in relation to Connect America Phase 2. And what we've done in working with, actually we kind of took a page out of Alaska and what they've done, because they actually share in some of the same challenges we do. The federal government, and you can't blame them for this, they come out with some standard guidelines on what it costs to dig underground, what it costs to put aerial infrastructure up. But we have an island with an active volcano and lava rocks, and we have submarine cables that we need to place that if you're out in Nebraska or Illinois, you don't really have to deal with those kinds of issues. So how we're getting the bigger chunk of that 1.8 is sharing with the FCC, in fact, some of the exact data that we send to them about how our infrastructure is set up. Not necessarily Hawaiian Telecom, but what does the landscape look like? We have to make them cognizant of the Kilauea volcano, that we have 6 islands that we need to connect. And even to some point that we have some challenges related to getting our fibers back to other points within the globe. So we've submitted that as part of our application. There were some follow-up questions that the FCC sent us. We replied back to them. As far as how much money we're going to have, that's really dependent upon what guidelines the FCC sends out. And I don't think we're going to be able to get that information till about the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I will address that too, that there's money in rural development, there's health teleconnect grants that the state is actually looking at doing, working with partners and 501c3s to go out and write grants and get more money coming in for investment in our infrastructure. Work with ILEC. There was a question back.
Yeah, so working off of that, the state got the money and partnered with private entity. Would we still have to use that private entity for the service going to the house or business? As far as if the taxpayers are paying for it, like we would still have to pay a
Well, I mean, the way the state does, business now and has its procurements is if we get investment of, grant money or, tax revenues and things, and we're investing in our infrastructure to serve the state and government services, we, subscribe to those services and we pay for them on a monthly and, annual basis depending on what it is. So that's just part of our normal operations and maintenance of just keeping things running. If there was some deal that was structured for an investment in a public-private partnership, that would be probably structured differently. But that hasn't occurred yet. But if it were, we are open in all ways, like just with building data centers and things like that into public-private partnerships. Maybe those are leaseback arrangements. We're looking at a variety of different ways to fund and maintain those types of investments in public-private partnerships. But it's not been, nothing's been cemented at this point. Yes.
Is there
You want to say that?
grant associated with the FirstNet?
There was a grant issued from the NTIA to the State Department of Defense for $850,000 for preliminary designs and plans around the FirstNet system. It's not infrastructure money, it's not build money, it's just planning over a 3-year period. So the money was granted to the state, and the state is working through all the cities and counties and agencies to start the planning and design of that particular network. Okay. Oh.
So, it's kind of like, I got to correlate a little bit with what Don was saying, engaging in collaboration with the state. What does the state itself do?
An amazing of getting themselves involved in research networks, internet too, the whole country, getting high performance data computing center, wherever that was, they were in staying involved and active in all of these projects, that the researchers and those types of things. So that's happening definitely. They have been for years have been taking care of that aspect of it. But for our side, if you look at our tourist industry, I mean, it's like almost a 5-to-1 ratio of tourists to residents, in the state of Hawaii, and that all creates impact on our finite broadband resources and things like that. But if Hawaii were to come out and market itself as hey, this is the place to come for the most advanced, most innovative solutions in the world, come here, do technology here. It's developed here. It's innovated here. That would in the world market to attract attention and get people to and put things here. I definitely think in North America, when they talk about the DoD, they're always interested in putting their backups over here, out of side of North America. Just like we're interested in putting our backups there, in North America. So, that needs a bit more work. There is a lot going on, behind the scenes that keep dollars coming into the state to make those things happen. Don?
One of the things that really goes on that the general public doesn't really get a good feel for is, well, the university and the research and whatnot. If you're in a specific whatnot, you hear about it. But this is not the type of thing that headlines in the newspaper or whatnot. There's actually quite a bit, not just with the University of Hawaii, but also military. There's a lot. Our efforts being made to target those specific areas. These efforts generally don't get a whole lot of attention or a whole lot of. There's actually a pretty good effort going on, and it's not just. There's a lot of cooperation with private areas.
Yeah, I know runs programs for incubators for companies that are starting out to sit in here, incubate here, and create a presence in Hawaii, and they've had success with those programs. Those are usually internet-based companies, and a lot here in the last year and a half. Yeah. Oh, in the very back. Sorry.
Excuse me, Act 264, is that two questions? Does that include the wireless company? How many of the Hawaiian counties are on board with that act currently?
Which one was 264? The streamlining?
That's the
Today. Okay, that doesn't include the counties. So it's a permit streamlining. It requires a decision on all permit applications within 60 days, yes or no. When an applicant comes, to the state to do these things, from the special use permits, we have conservation use permits that happen, and I think those it's a little bit longer than 60 days. I think those for those, but you still have to, that's complete the other processes typically that the county has and that the government has inside of those timelines. So the streamline the permitting process state level, and it kind of cascades. Hopefully, the state works with the counties on their particular permitting and zoning. There's a lot of, you got to go through a lot of agencies. Something landed here. So part of what the strategy bed is working on is if they create a landing site, a manhole goes out to the shelf, they will have already streamlined a lot of the permitting process because EIS done, they'll have all this stuff done, and then people just push their cable through that on the sand and take it from there. That's a way to look at how we are able to effectively streamline the permitting process. Okay, there's a question up here. Yeah, you want to talk about technology? Yeah.
That's actually a pretty good question. It's very hard to predict the future with technology, just like how, if you take a look back and you look at how long did copper lasted 100 years, and the real question around of the infrastructure that's out there at both ends, the service provider end and the customer end. Economics of it, the service provider doesn't want to keep something new on the street, such as fiber and then replacing fiber with something else. It's much more cost effective service provider and ultimately for the customer if the electronics at both ends. So when Don showed graphs that the undersea have, they just upgrade the electronics at both ends and more bandwidth. In fact, if you see some of Oceanic as well as Hawaiian Telcom increase their speeds, it's not necessarily because we're replacing copper with, we're replacing the modem at the end or the electronic. And that's kind of been the trend over the past 10 to 20 years. Copper's kind of run out of its useful life. It's more than a gig out of it over long distance. Run into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There are so many challenges for telecom in Hawaii, right? You got to talking about their filings with the FCC, and the feds are well aware of that. It's a test zone. We're in fact trying to market that as FirstNet dollars and things here, is to say we have the most diverse you could ever imagine. Do all your testing for this FirstNet, build out that infrastructure, make it 100% ubiquitous everywhere. Because we face here, everyone else will be covered, right? We've got lava, we've got storm surge, we've got tsunami, we have hurricanes, jungle, that affects the wireless, environmental factors. All of crazy stuff out there, right? Anchor drag issues. On and on and on. The poles can't hold any more weight. There's not enough conduit in the ground. So we have reefs, fish protected, and national monuments. So a great place to do this kind of testing. And like I said, we're trying to market. On the electronic side, if we went from 10, if you look at the plan, right, they went from 10 gig wavelengths to 40 gig to 100 gig wavelengths. I don't know what it's going to be. Logarithmic, go to, terabit. The cost of that, it's so expensive for that equipment, for it. And if they're not going to put it in if it's not going to be used. electricity, and you're not really taking advantage of it. But his concern is our use going to outstrip before this next technology wave comes? That's the unknown. That's the uncertainty. So we're trying to just that, knowing for the plan, the roadmap, going technology is inserted that just revolutionizes the industry. But that itself will have a 100-year life cycle. So copper have a 100-year life cycle. Trains have a 100-year life cycle of technology. Probably no different. Whatever's next, I'm not. All I can do is what we can do now to just make things work and. Questions? No? Why don't you take that one?
Okay.
What are you doing to land in Hawaii? I mean, why are we doing that?
On the private sector, the reasons why they need to land here, Keone's kind of, and when we go out to the conglomerates, those are one of the first things they bring. You need to make it as easier for us as possible, and that's exactly why, kind of sound like a broken record, why we need to have that private-public, because as an example, I don't know into 20 steps that need to be done to get permits approved. There are companies that do that for us or help us with that. Having direct connections to state leaders, HBI and Dawn, that makes it easier because we already have the right players involved. So and all the things that he and his team have done to work, DBED, DCCA, DLNR, come together so that when we do finally get to a point of agreement, most of those hurdles are already taken care of. Probably the best answer that I can give you, because uncharted territory, because people would have to land here. Now that they don't, we have to make it as easy for them as possible.
Is really taking the lead in selling. It's an investment. It's a return on investment, and they have taken meetings with all the cable consortia, and they fly out here. They meet with them. They have them meet the governor, and they talk. We've issued letters of intent with, please come in Hawaii. We're friendly. We have the yeah. So. He's on the cable in Hawaii, essentially, not Oregon or Hermosa Beach. Or go there after stopping in Hawaii first.
I think there's an important point that should be made. Without any of these efforts, I think it wouldn't have any more cables coming into the state.
Right, well, the last specific cable landed here in 2000, correct? There has been none for 13 years. So it's telling, but it's unfortunate for us because we have very and things that we need to do here. We just need to get the message out and communicate as much as possible. I think Japan, after their last tsunami event, they're looking at how to move the cables out of Japan and reroute them, down. They all got wiped out in the tsunami. There was quite a few cables there. Yeah, they got cut. So, any other questions? Yes.
Yes, and here's how I would carry. Most of these cable landings decades ago. As we pointed out, the most recent was 2000. But if you think back 20 years, when these things came in, security was not an issue at the time. There is a concern over the security of the Trans-Pacific cables that land in Hawaii. Probably because, as I said, when they came in, security wasn't a concern. No designs around that. And it's especially a concern today because 20 years, the range of security risks has just gone off the I can tell you know, the next cables that come in will be a big part of the design.
Yeah. One partner that we didn't mention, we mentioned DC, DLNR, and OMT, the governor's office, was State Defense under the Adjutant General. And their key focus is protection programs and hardening infrastructure. And most of our HBI budget is actually in the for the state. Okay, any other questions out there?
So your question is the advancement of technology hindering us from placing more fiber? Actually, I think it more has the cost to deploy it than anything. And cost usually isn't an issue if revenue to support it or demand in other. So take an extremely rural area, the Big Island. We already have challenges, not only Hawaiian Telecom, but all service providers getting to areas because we have to stick poles in fields and whatnot. That's what's really the most expensive. The fibers themselves is actually relatively cheap. That's the cheapest part. The most expensive part is the labor in placing it out. Oh, okay. Okay, now I understand. Yeah, so typically with these conglomerates, and I don't run the best thinking that I possibly can to answer it, upgrade their electronics at each of their cable stations, coordination, and this equipment is usually very expensive. So if they're going to make an investment in the tens of millions, it has to survive at least, I would say, 5 to 7 years. And so when plans are put in place to the cost to provide that, you have to weigh that against how fast is growing. And I'll tell you right now, once the started coming out, bandwidth usage increased much higher than it used to be. And so biggest thing could be over the top or something else that is the need for more bandwidth. And because these conglomerates, they require a lot of coordination. And so we don't want to be stuck in a situation where we're dependent on those folks to help bail us out.
All right, everyone, that concludes our session. I'm sorry, we're going to take questions. Immediately following the session will be a 15-minute break and refresh area. The next set of concurrent sessions will begin at 2:45, and please refer to your program guide for room assignments. Mahalo. Thank you.